You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. We are once again back to talk about Bodie Hodge, Kenham's son-in-law and all-around doofus. I'm going to be taking a bit of a risk here in that this talk was given by Answers in Genesis, and it was published on their channel. It's a bit of a risk because, as you know, AIG is a bag of dicks who like to issue false copyright claims on fair use videos incorporating their work, all the while themselves relying on fair use. As a result, I'm sure I'll have to wait months before any ad revenue comes in from this video, and it may well suffer in the algorithm for it. So I'm going to ask you to like this video, leave a comment, share it with people you think might like it, and importantly, watch another video of mine after this. YouTube likes to make it hard to grow a channel, and I need your help to make sure mine keeps going. Anyway, here's the man of the hour.
If you have a global flood, it destroys the idea of millions of years. We can't have that here.
No, actually, it doesn't. You could have a global flood at any point in the thousands of millions of years of Earth's history. There's nothing that's logically incoherent about that. It's just that there's no evidence that it happened, so it's not a part of any scientific model of geology.
So if I turned around and then wrote a paper on a global flood on Mars, sure, we'll take the paper.
Only if you have evidence of such a flood, which currently there is none of. Now, there is evidence of massive flooding on Mars, and interestingly, it shows that when floods get huge, they just scale up the same effects that you get with smaller floods. That is, you get single layers of turbidite deposited, it erodes the landscape in fairly straight channels with only gentle bends, and it leaves behind things like massive ripple marks and teardrop-shaped erosional features. We can see this in some places on Earth, like the scablands of eastern Washington, but if there were a global flood, it would be seen everywhere. It's not, so there was no global flood.
It's very nice of the Lord to give us 30% of the land surface back, wasn't it?
Not given that he had just unnecessarily killed all the land animals and committed near total genocide, no. In fact, it's a gigantic dick move all around. You probably shouldn't worship a god who thinks that killing babies is a good solution for naughty parents. Imagine if Child Protective Services in the United States simply killed the children of abusive parents. That would cause an uproar, including from Answers in Genesis, and yet God decided that, yeah, that's what he'd do, and also kill the parents too, or at least that's what happened if you take the flood story literally. No wonder most Christians don't.
Really was. But notice the millions of years is gone. So if we just start with the Bible, how old's the Earth?
So it's not just a global flood, like he said, that would get rid of the millions of years. It's specifically the version of one he believes in. Weird how he'd start out so broadly that it makes it untrue, only to then do a bait and switch to one very specific global flood. It's almost like Bodie here doesn't care about being honest with his audience, or he's too sloppy to notice.
I think they gave us, 3 hours in here? Let's start adding up those genealogies.
Yeah, but there's only about a half hour of this video left, so you might want to...
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
Get on with it!
Now, if you guys know we're not going to be here for 3 hours, and we're not looking at genealogies for 3 hours either. If you're ever having trouble sleeping, those genealogies, I'm not kidding, it won't take long at all.
Or I could just listen to Bodie Hodge talks. That works too. At least when I'm not trying to script a response to them that's sufficiently funny, snarky, and educational. That keeps me on my toes, which is convenient since Ceratosaurus are digitigrade, and I can't really do anything but keep on my toes if I'm standing at all.
Forget counting sheep, don't take an Ambien, read genealogies, book of Numbers. But let's do a short estimate. God created everything in 6 days, rested on the seventh. On the sixth day of creation, God made Adam. So it's about 5 days before him. So it's almost negligible in the calculation there. Now, if you add up the genealogies from Adam to Abraham, now most people can do this. This is in Genesis chapter 5. It's in Genesis chapter 11. It gives you all the chronological data. It's simple math.
Which makes it beyond the reach of ICR's Jeffrey Tompkins, who can't add 3-digit numbers, and who doesn't know how to weight an average, or even that it's something he might want to do.
In fact, I put this together in my book, Flood of Evidence. It's also my Tower of Babel book. And you can just tally it up. Here's where the flood is. Boom, you go all the way up here to Abraham. He's about 2,000 years after Adam. So it's about 2,000 years between Adam and Abraham.
Cool, so this is a hypothesis. Now we just need to find some evidence because this is just a claim being made on the basis of a literalist reading of the genealogies. Now to see if it's true, we need to test it against reality. The problem is that when we do things like genetic testing, we find that Y-chromosomal Adam didn't correspond to a time 4,400 years ago, when Noah would have lived and been the earliest candidate for most recent common Y-chromosomal ancestor. Instead, we get a figure that's 2 orders of magnitude larger. Now, there have been attempts by creationists, such as Nathaniel Jeanson in his book Trace, to get the genetics to fit into the biblical timeline. but they have failed miserably. In fact, they have failed miserably at about the level of high school algebra by what more or less amounts to using the wrong units. Now, to get his number, Nathaniel Jeanson has openly stated that he treats the per-generation mutation rate as the rate at which new alleles fix in populations. The mutation rate is measured by taking DNA samples across a few generations, such as grandparent, parent, and child, maybe even great-grandparent, then simply counting up the number of mutations that are found in the sequenced DNA of each generation using the first generation in the sample as the baseline. Now, generations aren't a measurement of time, but if you can get an average mutation rate per generation and an average length between generations, you can kind of convert a mutation rate into a mutations per year number. Already, though, we've run into a problem. DNA samples are taken for these studies the same way they are for things like genealogy tests or criminal investigations. That is, by things like cheek swabs or blood samples. This means that it will capture mutations that have occurred in the body or somatic cells that did not occur in the reproductive or germline cells. To capture that, we would need to do DNA sample by harvesting people's gametes, which, especially for females, would be a pretty invasive thing to do. So already we're capturing mutations that physically cannot be fixed in the population. But an even more severe problem is that of natural selection. And AIG accept natural selection, as does Nathaniel Jeanson. In fact, he even wrote an article for AIG about it to contradict the claims of his former boss, Randy Galuza, of the Institute for Creation Research, who seems to be the only big holdout against natural selection among creationists. Natural selection works to remove some mutations from the gene pool of the populations in consideration, and if it works at all, it means that the rate at which mutations fix in a population, such that all members of the population have that mutation, must, of mathematical necessity, be lower than the mutation rate converted into a per-year rate. It's not often I say this, but this is a proven fact. The math makes it logically impossible for this not to be the way it works. If natural selection exists and operates on the population in question, then the per-year mutation rate cannot equal the long-term substitution rate under any circumstances. The problem is that this means that the time to Y chromosome atom is going to be a lot more than 4,400 years ago, and so the Bible as interpreted by AIG and Bodie here simply cannot be right about the chronology of human history. That was me taking a long time to basically say that while Bodie has a claim that he bases on his interpretation of the Bible, that claim has already been tested and it has been falsified, and the creationist attempts to rescue the claim are logically incoherent. So as it stands, the claim has been falsified already, and Bodie's interpretation of Genesis does not correspond to reality.
Most scholars, Christian or secular, Jewish.
Wait, I thought there were only two religions, and one of them was Christianity, and all the other ones were basically humanism, which Bodie likes to basically assume is secularist. Is Judaism a secret third religion?
They all agree that Abraham lived about 2,000 years before Jesus, which is about 4,000 years from today. So you tally this up, you get about 6,000 years.
Neat. Too bad we already know that that's an impossible time frame, but neat nonetheless. I'm sure it'll be useful to someone's Vampire the Masquerade campaign, or their SCP tale about Cain and Abel.
In fact, this is what most chronologists, Christians or Jews, have arrived at over the past 2,000 years. It's been in recent times, from the 17 and 1800s, when people first started to say, let's leave the Bible out of it to look at history.
Yeah, which is, how you know if your interpretation is correct, if it's supported by the evidence. Bodie is just complaining that when you look for evidence for his interpretation of the Bible, it's entirely lacking, and so instead of looking for evidence and then changing your mind when the evidence falsifies your beliefs, he says we should just ignore the evidence. That's fine for him, but if you value the truth, honesty, or even just human advancement, it's important to believe as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible. Bodie has decided that, in fact, whether the things he believes are actually supported by evidence isn't important, which is basically a guarantee that he will believe fewer true things than he could and more false things than he could.
Well, here's a good question. Does the Bible talk about any dinosaurs? What do you guys think? Yeah, can anybody tell me book and chapter? Job 40, yeah, you guys are all over that one. Job 40. Talks about a critter called Behemoth. Do you guys use the word critter? Where I'm from, we use critter and warsh and crick. I wasn't too far from where Mark Twain was. I don't speak like that normally, but yeah. Okay, let me read verses 15 through 19 here. Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now his strength is in his hips and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Now, if you keep reading the context, this behemoth goes out into a flooding Jordan River and has no fear. It migrates from mountains to the marshes. It's in amongst the reeds and the lotus trees, hardly give it shade. This is a massive creature, the first, or the chief of the ways of God.
I really hate this. We all know he's going to say that it's just a sauropod. I want you to think of a sauropod like Brachiosaurus, Brontosaurus, yes, that's a thing, or Diplodocus. What's the first thing you think of?
Long neck. Mother, what's a long neck?
Why, that's what we are, dear.
Oh.
Right, it's their necks. Isn't it a bit weird that this never comes up in Job 40?
But I love verse 17. I just love it. He moves his tail like a cedar. Have you ever seen a cedar tree move?
Not in person that I'm aware of, no. But let's look at the verse Job 40:17. He moveth his tail like a cedar. Let's take a look at the first two words. Yapots zavanow. Now, you'll have to forgive me my terrible Hebrew here. The first word, yapots, is a third-person singular imperfect verb. It can mean move, desire, wish, or will. Here it pretty clearly means move. The second word, zavanow, means his tail. Zanav meaning tail, and the last bit, o, is an enclitic possessive suffix meaning his. Classical Hebrew is verb, subject, object, the fourth most common word order after subject, object, verb, which is 41% of languages, subject, verb, object at 34.4% of languages, and unfixed at 13.7% of languages. In case you're wondering, verb, subject, object is 6.9% of languages. Nice. Anyway, all that is to say that he moves his tail like a cedar is a very literal translation. It does not say that his tail is the size of a cedar or as strong as a cedar, simply that it moves like a cedar. So what does that actually mean? I don't really know, and neither, I suspect, does Bodie. Does it mean that it sways like a cedar branch in the wind? That it goes back and forth like the bulk of the tree? Not sure, but one thing I am sure of is that it's not a reference to the size of the tail. Now, I expect to go deeper into this whole behemoth thing later.
That's what she said.
So let's see where Bodie takes us.
Now, some cedar trees are gigantic. These are some smaller ones. But if the wind is really blowing, it might kink over a little bit. But, it's pretty rigid yet.
Those are American cedars, not Lebanese cedars, which is obviously what would have been meant by the author of Job. Now, there are claims that the tail reference is in fact a euphemism for penis, and this is a common euphemism cross-linguistically, but I cannot find any evidence of this euphemism in ancient Hebrew. Sometimes it is also claimed that the word used for thigh or loin in the Hebrew passage, that is, pechadin, is actually better translated as testicle, meaning that even though using tail for penis is not a common euphemism in Hebrew, that it works here because of wordplay. Before I continue, here's a quick vocab word. It's cognate, and it's a tool we'll use later. A cognate is a word that shares a common ancestor with a word in a related language. So for example, in German, the word Hund, in Dutch, Hond, and in English, hound, are cognates. Hund and Hond mean dog, and hound is a subset of dogs. They all descend from the Proto-Germanic hundas. Okay, back to the point. Checking with the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, which gives both definitions and cognates, reveals that the cognate in Arabic is used to mean thigh, especially of a sheep, and that the Syriac cognate means thigh or haunch, and gives the Hebrew definition as thigh. On the other hand, the Hebrew-Aramaic Lexicon Project at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion supports the claim that it means testicle, using sources from the Targum, Onkelos, and Peshitta, all of which use it as testicle. They are a long-standing Reform seminary that trains rabbis and cantors, and they are the oldest Jewish seminary in the United States. But they also note that cognates in other languages mean thigh, as we've already seen. As a result, I can't rule out that tail here means penis. However, I should note that all the claims about the use of this word for testicle seem to be from the Targum, which is significantly later than the composition of Job and other later works. So it may well be that this change is a later development, and that at the time of writing the word really did mean thigh, making the penis reading of zanav unlikely to be intended by the author. As it stands now, I am inclined to think it is more likely that the original use was not a euphemism. I also want to thank Dr. Kip Davis and Vishanti for helping me figure this out, as I was at my wit's end trying to read Aramaic sources, which, by the way, is a language with more dialect than you can shake a stick at, and more alphabets than any language should be allowed.
Now, there's Bible commentaries that footnote this and say, well, maybe this is an elephant or a hippo.
Of those two, I tend to favor the elephant. But I also think that the claim that just like the Leviathan is a mythical chaos serpent, which dwells in the Great Deep, or Tehom in Hebrew, which is etymologically related to Akkadian Tiamat, another chaos serpent or dragon, that Behemoth, with its etymological relationship to cattle, is itself a mythical bull creature. Indeed, the parallel in Job is repeated in 1 Enoch, where Leviathan is a female creature living in the depths of the sea, while Behemoth is a male creature living in a remote desert. They are not members of larger populations, but are singular monstrous individuals. Now, this book is not part of most biblical canons, with the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Church being the only Christian group I'm aware of that considers it canonical, and there are no Jewish groups that I'm aware of that would take it as part of or equal to the Tanakh. However, it was very popular in both Christian and Jewish circles in antiquity and before, and it at least is an ancient witness to how both Leviathan and Behemoth were conceptualized in that time. But granted, it is a later source, and we can't be confident that it reflects the views of the author of Job.
So really, an elephant or a hippo? So I go down to Cincinnati Zoo, I'm checking out the elephants. Cincinnati Zoo, beautiful Asian elephants down there. There's 3 places around the pen where you can see the elephants. And everybody congregates where the elephants are looking, where they're feeding them. And they get nice pictures of the tusks and the trunks and the ears. Well, I'm on the backside. I'm back here taking pictures like, yeah. They're looking at me like, what is that guy doing? But I got great pictures of the backside's elephants.
This is really kind of weird, and I mostly just left it in because I honestly find it a bit amusing that Bodie is an ass man, especially for elephants.
I was trying to take a picture of that tail. Now this tail, this is like right in mid-swoop. It's flopping up there trying to knock bugs and flies and insects off its back. It's moving around like a weeping willow. Not at all the way a cedar would move. What about a hippo?
They like to shake their tails vigorously while defecating, because they use their fecal matter as a territorial scent marking. And if there's one thing to know about hippos, it's that they are extremely territorial, and will even unalive lions for getting too close. Hippos are by far the most dangerous thing in their range.
That thing hardly has a tail. It's a little flap of skin that goes, ugh. It's really weird.
It's not the size of the tail that matters, Bodie. It's how you use it.
Tail that moves more like a cedar, something like this. I've got it bent around to fit on the illustration.
No, that's a tail that's more the size of a cedar. Any tail of any size could move like a cedar, but also there's still that chance that the tail is actually the penis.
Does that work? No, not happening. It actually fits a creature a little bit more akin to something like a sauropod dinosaur, which actually fits the context a bit better.
Yeah, everyone thinks of the tail first when thinking about sauropods.
Long neck. Mother, what's a long neck?
Why, that's what we are, dear.
Oh.
Just give you a size comparison. Brachiosaur compared to an elephant, compared to a hippo. You know, the Bible says this is the first of the chief of the ways of God, made alongside Job. Which one would make more sense of that? The larger, more significant creature, of course.
Sure, but so would a mythical giant bull, and so would the elephant if that were the largest animal known to the author of Job. In order to say that it makes more sense for it to be a sauropod, we need a clear indication that the author knew about sauropods, and since he didn't even clearly describe one in the text, we have no evidence of sauropods even being alive at the time of the composition of Job. There's no reason to think he could have known what one is.
Well, the very next chapter talks about a critter called Leviathan. Now, this is a water creature, so by technical definition, it's not considered a dinosaur.
I mean, there were and are dinosaurs that spent a whole lot of time in the water, like spinosaurids, cormorants, and penguins, but okay.
But I'm going to go ahead and read verses 18 through 21. Tell me what you think of when I get done with this one. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning light. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth.
I think of the mythical chaos serpent that was defeated by the Mesopotamian gods and used to create the world. And in fact, the God of Israel in Psalm 74, or 73 if you prefer the Septuagint numbering, is said to have killed Leviathan after splitting open the sea in a pretty direct parallel to the Mesopotamian gods killing Tiamat. And remember, Tiamat is conceptualized as a great serpent-like dragon, so the fiery breath makes sense as a further connection.
What does that make you think of? Yeah, like a fire-breathing dragon. So I've had people come in and say, okay, Bodie, this Leviathan and this Behemoth, they're just mythological creatures. They're not real. Not really.
Yeah, really. Leviathan is clearly connected to chaos monsters. And in other works of post-exilic Judaism, both Leviathan and Behemoth are treated as singular monsters directly parallel to the mythical singular monsters of other cultures, like Humbaba from the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Charybdis of Greek myth. The only way to come to much other conclusion is to simply assume that the Bible has no mythical element, and even then, dinosaur is not a likely explanation, since we have no evidence of non-avian dinosaurs, or things like plesiosaurs, Thalattosaukians, or mosasaurs living in the first millennium BCE.
Because here, the Lord is speaking to Job here. This is the Lord speaking directly to him. He's speaking to him, Job 38 through 41. And the Lord, during that time, talks about a lion. Is that real? Yep. Raven, goat, deer, donkey, wild ox, ostrich, horse, locust, hawk, eagle. They're all real.
Yes, and then it transitions to monstrous creatures that the authors may well have believed in, but that were unique mythical creatures of supernatural power to further drive home the point about the sovereignty of God. This all makes sense as a reference to what we know to be non-real monsters, but that were more often thought of as real at the time of the writing of the text.
Why would the Lord suddenly, in mid-sentence, switch to mythological creatures?
Because it's both parallel to the other creatures in displaying the power and sovereignty of God, but also an escalation to further drive it home. God says he's sovereign over all these common animals that are powerful or have destructive capacity or the power of flight, like lions, ravens, oxen, and locust. But not only them, but even the mighty Behemoth and Leviathan, so powerful and unique that other cultures cast them as semi-divine antagonists to the gods. The only reason this doesn't work for Bodie is that he doesn't believe in giant, semi-divine cosmic monsters, because his theology has moved away from those being real. But that doesn't mean that's not what's going on in Job. It just means that he's desperately trying to reinterpret Job to fit into a theological framework that would be alien to the actual author of the text.
Especially saying that he made that behemoth right alongside Job. Of course it was a real creature.
Yeah, the author believed these creatures were real. The problem is that he was wrong. But Bodie won't allow for that because he starts off with the premise that nothing in the Bible can be factually incorrect, and does not allow, actual facts to interfere with this. If this example that's coming up isn't fire and isn't a tetrapod, then I'm going to dismiss it. If it's not, then it's like saying Electro, the Spider-Man villain, could be real because electric eels can shock prey with electricity, completely ignoring that they use structures tetrapods don't have to produce electricity, and that the medium used isn't air, in which the structures wouldn't work.
But Bodie, the Lord never make a creature shoot fire. Really? Let me introduce you to a bombardier beetle.
I am shocked. Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Okay, well, moving on, since a beetle shooting hot smelly liquid has nothing to do with a dinosaur shooting fire out of its nose.
The Bible talked about other creatures that shot fire. There's the fiery flying serpents in Isaiah. You go back to the books of Moses with Numbers and Deuteronomy here. It talks about the fiery serpents. So, if the Lord can do this with a bug, can he do this with these fiery serpents and with Leviathan? Yeah, it's not a problem.
We know what these are because we have pictures of them in the archaeological record on things like amulets. They're four-winged cobras that are sort of a riff on the winged cobras of ancient Egypt. Unless Bodie is going to produce the remains of a cobra with 4 bird wings, this too is a mythical animal that never existed that the Bible is talking about.
Hey, why don't we find the word dinosaur in the Bible then?
He's just going to say that it's because Richard Owen didn't invent it until 18 whatever year. The problem is that it's been invented now, and it's still not used in modern translations, for the very fact that at no point is any word in the Bible best translated as dinosaur, because other than birds, who are usually just called oaf, plural ophonym, although the word can refer to anything that flies with wings, the Bible doesn't really talk about dinosaurs. I don't care to make you sit through the whole Richard Owen thing again, as it's been on the channel many times. We'll just skip that discussion. It'll spare you, and it'll also spare me, because writing the script is beginning to feel like I'm being swallowed by a cold dark ocean of madness on a starless night, with only a moon hanging above me. But it's the wrong moon.
Hey, is there another word that was used in the Old Testament that included creatures like dinosaurs? Let me give you a hint. There's a reason for the shirt. Dragon.
The word translated as dragon in the Old Testament is tanin, or sometimes tanim, although tanim can also mean jackals. This is related to the Syriac tanina, the Arabic tinin, the Akkadian danina, and the Ugaritic tunanu. In all of these cases, it is a serpent-like water creature similar to the Leviathan, and is a symbol of chaos. Oh gee, seems like we're right back to Leviathan as that mythical cosmic chaos monster. And remember how much Bodie likes to emphasize that dinosaurs aren't aquatic, even though that's not entirely correct? Yeah, well, tanin are pretty conclusively tied to the sea and water. This is so well established that the Israeli Navy has named 3 submarines tanin. The reason that modern translations don't use the word dinosaur when translating tanin is that it's not what the word means. Indeed, remember back in Psalm 74 when God killed Leviathan in parallel to Mesopotamian myths about the slaying of Tiamat? Yeah, in verse 13, the verse right before that, God crushes Rashi Taninim al-Hamayim. And again, forgive my Hebrew, but that's the heads of the Tanin, or monsters in the waters. Like, this is first-year Hebrew crap. I didn't even need to look those words up, and I suck at Hebrew. These are not dinosaurs. They're sea monsters. There is no way to make them dinosaurs. Either no one at AIG knows any Hebrew, or they're just lying. Now, given how often I've seen them use upside-down pictures of Torah scrolls, because then it looks less justified, which is what they're used to seeing in all their first languages. I suspect that it's that no one there knows any significant amount of Hebrew, and I mean even less than me.
The word dragon is used in the King James Old Testament 22 times, in the Old Geneva Bible 24 times. And it's not one isolated book, it's all throughout the Old Testament.
Yep, the ancient Hebrews sure liked talking about sea monsters. Okay, the word is tanin in Genesis 1:21, Exodus 7:9 through 12, Deuteronomy 32:33, Nehemiah 2:13, Psalm 74:13, which we've already talked about, Psalm 91:13, Psalm 148:7, Isaiah 51:9, Jeremiah 41:34, Ezekiel 29:3, and Job 7:12. It might be tanin or tan, meaning jackal, in Psalm 44:19. Isaiah 13:22 is almost certainly talking about jackals, since it talks about the animals in question howling through the halls of a citadel or fortress. This is also true of Isaiah 34:13, which also mentions ostriches. Isaiah 35:7 and 43:20 are also part of the same passage and are talking about jackals. Jeremiah 9:11, 10:22, and 14:6 are all talking about jackals inhabiting the ruins of Jerusalem, which are pictured as desolate heights, meaning that it's unlikely that they're talking about a water serpent. Jeremiah 49:33 and 51:37 are doing the same but for Babylon, so it's jackals here too. Micah 1:8 has Micah howling like one of the tanim, which means once again we're almost certainly talking about jackals. In Isaiah 27:1, it's actually Leviathan who is identified as a tanin, and as a singular entity in that class, furthering my point that Leviathan isn't simply the name of a species of reptile, but is a unique individual among the watery chaos serpents. In Lamentations 4:3, it talks about the tanim presenting their breasts to their young to suckle, and again mentions ostriches, so this is definitely jackals. So we have only one word, not three, here for these creatures, and a bunch of verses are actually talking about jackals doing things like howling, inhabiting ruins, and nursing young. You know, like mammals. Did Bodie actually read any of these verses he cited? Because if he had, he'd know that at least a bunch of them are definitely not about dragons. It's almost like creationists still have a bad relationship with honesty, even about their own texts.
And there was about 3 different words that were utilized to translate into dragon.
I feel like it's pretty obvious we're talking about a singular entity known as Leviathan, which is a sea monster and lines up with the passages in 1st Enoch as well as Mesopotamian myths about Tiamat. If I were Bodie, this isn't a passage I would have highlighted.
At least the translators felt the need to do that. Let's look at a couple of these. Isaiah 27, verse 1. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan the piercing serpent, even Leviathan that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. Psalm 91:13. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under feet.
Okay.
So Bodie, you trying to tell me dinosaurs and dragons are the same thing?
Well, if he is, that's dumb, because at no point has he given a reason to think that chaos water serpents meet the definition of dinosaur.
Actually, let me put it this way. I would say all the dinosaurs could technically be called a dragon, but not all the dragons could be called a dinosaur.
Well then, I wait with bated breath for the evidence that any of the passages that actually mention tanin, and not just jackals, are actually about dinosaurs, even if not all of them are.
Let me say that again, because that's really important. All the dinosaurs, by their definition, could be called a dragon, but not all the dragons technically fit the description of a dinosaur.
Do any of them? And if so, which?
Here's why. The word dragon is more of an overarching term. It included flying reptiles and sea reptiles and the serpentine land reptiles. Even crocodiles could be considered dragons.
I have yet to see tanin, the only word Bodie has produced to mean dragon, reasonably be defined so as to include flying reptiles or dinosaurs. Pretty much just water monsters and maybe snakes as a bit of poetic flourish. I'd accept crocodiles though, as they're basically water monsters.
But it also included the dinosaurs.
Citation needed.
But remember dinosaurs, the definition for them? They were very specific types of land reptiles that had one of 2 hip structures.
I do in fact remember Bodie's completely insufficient definition. Refer back to earlier in this series for a better definition.
So not all the dragons would fit the description of being a dinosaur, but yes, all the dragons could rightly have been called all the dinosaurs could rightly have been called a dragon.
You see, this is the kind of claim that, if true, would be supported by citations from texts that use a word translated as dragon that is at least likely to describe a dinosaur such that the description actually fits. So far, there have been none.
Aren't dragons a myth?
Generally, yes, although the ancients also lumped some real animals like crocodiles, monitor lizards, and big snakes into the same category.
We've all heard that, haven't we?
Yeah, probably, and for good reason. I wonder if Bodie really thinks that Christians going around proclaiming that they believe in dragons will be a boon to Christianity.
You know, this idea started floating around in the 1800s, finally gained steam, but it wasn't till about 1910 the encyclopedias came out and started to say they're a myth.
Citation needed.
And well, I realized when I was doing a lot of research on this, particularly for the book.
Why do I feel like the man who thinks that the prophet Micah was howling with dinosaurs rather than jackals might not have really done all that much research?
In the 1800s, people had this mindset that animals really couldn't go extinct.
At least at the beginnings of the 1800s.
I mean, today we look, wow, all sorts of animals have gone extinct. We got records of it like crazy. But back then, they didn't think animals could go extinct. That was like a thought beyond them. So if you couldn't find them, well, then they didn't exist. They were a myth. And so that's what started floating around.
Okay, but what if you can't even find dead ones as fossils or something? Like, there just is no evidence whatsoever of these things. That's probably good evidence that they didn't exist. And the thing is, we don't have any evidence of non-avian dinosaurs living with humans, like, at all. So legends about winged fire-breathing serpents are probably just that, and not cultural memories of actual dinosaurs.
Yeah, it was 1910. When they came out, somebody said, hey, let's go try to find some dragons up here in the Alps. Somebody said there's still some Alps or a mountain range over in Europe. Guy went up there, he couldn't find them, so he said, therefore they're myth.
Sure, whatever. I could not possibly in any world care less what Walter Allison Phillips said about anything. But this is long after the scientific world had come to understand that organisms could and had gone extinct. So I'm not sure what the point is.
This idea that animals have been going extinct is a relatively new idea.
But it's older than 1910.
But we know that that's been happening. We've seen dodo birds, passenger pigeons. A lot of people think the West African rhino recently went extinct. There's hosts of different creatures that have gone extinct. Dinosaurs and dragon-like creatures are no exception.
Bodie needs to be less like a circle and more like a triangle, in that he needs to get a point.
There were people that went against some of these encyclopedias. New Century Dictionary here. First published in 1927. This is a reprint from 1946. I have a copy of it. Dragon, huge serpent or snake, now rare.
Now, rare doesn't apply to dragons as animals. It's about the word's use. The word is now a rarely used word. Seriously, this is How to Dictionary 101, like 6th grade stuff. Bodie should know this, and I suspect he does.
Now, this also includes the fabulous monster definition, so you can see where it's transitioning over. But you look back in the past, people viewed dragons as real on just about every continent. Well, not Antarctica.
And they regarded griffins, various pagan deities, mermaids, hippocampi, and birds the size of mountains as real. So what? People in the past were wrong about things, so just the fact that they believed in something isn't evidence that that thing is real, especially if there's no evidence for it outside the belief itself.
But you know, when we look at historians and commentators, anatomists, scientists from the past, they agreed dragons were real.
And they still agree that pagan deities, mermaids, hippocampi, and the birds the size of mountains as real. Again, I must ask, so what?
One of the most famous dragon slayers is St. George.
St. George was a Roman legionary who was executed after being outed as a Christian. The story of him fighting a dragon simply didn't exist until the medieval period. There is literally no reason to think it's true, even though chances are that St. George was a real person.
But all across North Africa, the Middle East, Europe, we find dragon accounts all over the place. Just in the United Kingdom alone, each of these towns or villages have at least one dragon legend associated with it, if not more than one.
And we have just as many stories about fairies, elves, dwarves, and trolls. That doesn't make them real.
In England, before the Norman conquest in 1066, the dragon was chief among the royal ensigns in war.
Cool, and griffins were also used the same way all over Europe. Does that mean that we really had chimerical eagle lions with cute pointy ears all over the place? Probably not.
They'd be on flags and tapestries and all sorts of different things. In fact, this is part of the Bayeux tapestry. This is an ancient tapestry, about 1,000 years old.
That makes it medieval, not ancient. Words have meanings. Even if it were 2,000 years old, it would still be from early antiquity, so it wouldn't be ancient.
This is the first portion of it. It's a huge tapestry that outlines how the Normans conquered England. And you'll see all these different animals on there, and you'd readily recognize them, and then suddenly you get to some that look just like dragons. See the view dragons right there alongside other real creatures.
Okay, I wonder which dinosaur was basically a dog with bird wings sprouting from its armpits. I'm pretty sure it was none of them. Or which dinosaurs were dogs with chameleon tongues, scorpion tails, and bat wings sprouting from their back. I'm pretty sure it was, again, none of them. These medieval dragons never actually look like real dinosaurs, and it's pretty damn obvious.
When I went to Guildhall, this is in the Midlands of England.
Ah yes, there are so many well-known animals from the Mesozoic with 2 bat wings, no legs, the body of a snake, and a forked tail, a beak. Oh, and also mammal ears? Oh wait, I just checked. There isn't a single one.
This is the old government chambers where the mayor was and so forth. You saw dragons in there as well. You can tour through it. It's been closed for about 400 years.
Okay, tell me in the comments if you think Bodie saw these things and then thought to himself, yeah, that looks like a real animal that is known from the fossil record, or if you think he knows how stupid this is.
Saw it at different cathedrals, Bath Cathedral, Gloucester Cathedral, here's some at Leicester Cathedral. All sorts of things all across England, coins.
Oh, he knows about all these dragons from across England. It's odd how at no point have we heard which Mesozoic animals any of these dragons represent. And you know, based on how much creationists fawn over the Tapram's so-called Stegosaurus, that if they thought they could identify it as a known taxon, they would never stop. It's telling that with these, they don't even try.
It's just amazing. They viewed them as real creatures.
Bodie knows that just because people believe something existed doesn't mean it did, because he himself doesn't believe in all the gods anyone has ever believed in. Further, what if the people of England had not thought that these dragons were real, but instead they were just symbols? What would be different about any of these coins, decorations, or coats of arms? I can't think of anything. It's not like when someone today makes a painting of a dragon because they like them, that they have to put a caveat on the painting telling you that it's a fictional creature. They just make the painting and trust their audience to not be morons. Also, I love how we keep getting repeated things like 6-limbed dragons when there is no evidence at all of 6-limbed terrestrial vertebrates, or St. George killing a dragon, when we know that story was a medieval invention about a murder from late antiquity. It's more that Darwin had been working on natural selection longer and already had lots of notes on it, and so his friends urged him to get off his butt and actually publish before Wallace did. Neither really had a publicist, but are we about to learn that there was a heretofore unknown fossil of a bat-winged snake with a forked tail in the fossil record? Because otherwise, I'm not sure what this point is, which seems to be a theme with this talk.
I love this one. This is at the Leicestershire Museum and Art Gallery. This is the museum for Alfred Russel Wallace. Many of you may not know that name. Alfred Russel Wallace and Charles Darwin were evolutionists competing with each other. They were contemporaneous. They're trying to get their information out. Who's going to be first? Essentially, Darwin beat him to it. Had a better publicist. So you know Charles Darwin's name.
Yeah, and the Temple of Apollo at Delphi had a big old statue of Apollo. Notice how that isn't compelling evidence for the existence of Apollo, unless by that you mean literally the sun, which doesn't really need the statue for evidence. And hey, the people of Delphi even believed in Apollo, which is less likely by far with the people who made the floor mosaic in the Wallace Museum. But it still doesn't really matter. Humans are well known for believing things that aren't true, which Bodie knows because he thinks most of the world is wrong about evolution, and he knows that they depict hypothetical transitional forms that are predicted by evolution but have yet to be found. So he knows that people can depict things that they've never seen and that might not be real, and that they can even think that those things are real. I am finding it hard to believe that Bodie honestly thinks these dragons in early modern art, because that's primarily what we're seeing, that don't actually look like any fossil taxa whatsoever, are actually an argument at all for the survival of Mesozoic reptiles into the modern era, flood or no. And of course, what would it matter if some non-avian dinosaurs had survived? The theory of evolution doesn't say that groups must all go extinct. The reason that non-avian dinosaurs are believed to be extinct is because there's no evidence that they are not. And the reason it's thought that they went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous is again that there's no evidence of them past that. It actually has nothing to do with evolution.
Alfred Russel Wallace is a very famous evolutionist in his own right, but this is his museum. It's got a dragon there.
Again, that looks like no actual fossil animal, so there's no way to construe this as evidence for the late survival of dinosaurs.
I loved this one. This was out at a church, St. Mary Church. We had to actually walk down a dirt trail to get back here, and you open up and go in there, and well, you couldn't miss it. The ancient flag of Wales. It's been adopted as more of a recent flag, but this is an ancient flag that goes back over 1,000 years. They have the red dragon on there. The old Mercian flag in central England had a dragon.
Cool. As soon as Bodie produces evidence of 6-limbed Mesozoic terrestrial vertebrates, that'll be interesting.
In China, the dragon appears as the national symbol and badge of the royal family.
So does the Feng Huang, a creature with the beak of a rooster, the face of a swallow, the neck of a snake, the breast of a goose, and the back of a tortoise. I don't hear anyone arguing for that as a real animal. I wonder why. But let's not forget the Kirin, a scaly horse with cow feet and deer antlers.
The dragon adorned the Chinese flag until the founding of the Republic of China in 1911. And that's more the long, slender, we call this the Eastern dragon.
Ah, yes, a creature with too many toes to be a dinosaur, a body too long and sinuous to be anything with limbs, and that has the teeth and snout of a mammal, along with deer antlers. Yep, sure does just scream dinosaur, doesn't it?
Marco Polo commented on him in the AD 1200s when he visited China.
Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. His travel log was written not by him, but by his former prison cellmate based on stories Marco Polo had told in prison. So not only is it a second-hand account, but there's no way to check the stories. There's a reason why historians don't really use that book. It's known to not be reliable.
If you've ever been to a Chinese restaurant, you might see their 12-year cycle, a 12-year zodiac. They have an animal that represents each one of those years, 11 real creatures, and suddenly a dragon.
Yeah, the ancient Chinese actually believed in a bunch of stuff that turned out not to be real, including acupuncture. So what?
See, they viewed the dragon as a real creature.
They sure did. You know, I bet that Bodie isn't going to look across the sea at Japan and tell us how he thinks that various yokai, like turtles who eat your intestines through your anus, but only if you don't bow to them, causing the water to spill out of the built-in cup on their head, are real. Or maybe how there are what seem to be people in Japan, except that they have eyes where their anus should be. Those are both things that people have believed and depicted in art. Does that mean that eyeball-assed people and butt-sucking cuphead turtles existed in Japan for real? I doubt it, and I bet Bodie does too. But show him anything that's even vaguely reptilian and it's proof positive for late-surviving, non-avian dinosaurs.
When I was in South America, I went down to Peru. There's all sorts of textiles and rocks and pottery that has all sorts of dinosaur dragon-like creatures on it.
What makes that not just an iguana that's highly stylized? I mean, look at that plant under it that looks vaguely like a cactus of genus Opuntia. They're clearly not very photorealistic. Why should we expect the animal to be more so?
But here's a question I get a lot too, though. Dragons. Oh, that equates with Satan, right?
The theological and symbolic link between dragons and evil figures in the Revelation of St. John are of no interest to me right now, so I'm skipping that whole discussion.
So why don't we find dinosaurs today?
We do, in fossils and in life in the form of birds. But the reason we don't find living non-avian dinosaurs is because they're all extinct.
What's the obvious answer? What does the world say, actually?
Probably exactly what I just said, because, you know, if by the world we just mean science, then the world tends to go with evidence.
The world says dinosaurs evolved into birds.
Yep, strawman cartoons notwithstanding.
Friends, I have no idea what T-Rex used those little arms for.
Oh fun, we're about to hear that T-Rex couldn't evolve into birds. And that's true, it couldn't. And no one in science thinks it did. So we're going to skip this strawman.
But one of the things we see an awful lot of artist representations of dinosaurs with feathers on it.
I find it honestly quite amusing that among his artist impressions of feathered dinosaurs, he's got 3 pictures that don't show feathers on dinosaurs, but also 1 photograph of an actual fossil of Sinornithosaurus milleni, with visible pennaceous feather impressions. This is some serious incompetence.
And I've been looking, and Dr. David Minton, who died just not too long ago, actually,
and who thought Velociraptor was a bird and said,
So I conclude that dromaeosaurs are birds, and that would include velociraptors, deinonychus, and microraptors. So when a dinosaur has feathers, it is a bird.
Yeah, that guy.
He was one of the world's leading anatomists, brilliant guy.
Creationists must have a different meaning for world leading than the rest of us. The guy was either a moron of the highest caliber or just a flat out liar, and I suspect it's a bit of both.
He wasn't finding dinosaurs with feathers on it either.
Except that he had to pretend that non-avian Deinonychosaurs were birds because even he couldn't deny that they had feathers. Oh, and in his talk, he showed art that dishonestly changed their anatomy to be more bird-like than it really was, including eliminating the famous raptor claw entirely.
A host of people have been looking for this. We're not actually finding the fossils with feathers on it. We see an awful lot of illustrations that have them on it, but we're not finding them. Recently, the U.S. Postal Service did a series of T-Rex stamps, and they worked with the Smithsonian Institute to come up with these illustrations. If you look really carefully here at this baby T-Rex, They put downy feathers on it. See that dino fuzz?
I do, yes.
Did T-Rex ever have anything like that?
No one knows. It certainly wasn't covered in feathers as an adult, as we know at least most of its body was covered in reticulate scales, although frustratingly, we don't have skin impressions for the body parts most likely to have had feathers, such as along the back or thighs. But those impressions also are all from adult individuals, who were big enough that thermoregulation did not require lots of pelage, similar to how elephants have very little hair. But newly hatched Tyrannosaurus may well have benefited from such a coat, and it's possible that they were born with downy fuzz that later fell out. We know that many other Coelurosaurs, the group to which Tyrannosaurids belong, had fuzz, and so it's entirely possible that baby T-Rex did too. In fact, we know that the related Eutyrannus, which lived in an area with probably annual sub-freezing temperatures, was covered in fuzz. That being said, fuzzy baby Rex is speculative.
No. In fact, the Smithsonian's own website points out T-Rex was, well, covered in scales.
This story was based on Tyrannosauroid Integument Reveals Conflicting Patterns of Gigantism and Feather Evolution, published by the Royal Society in 2017 by Phil R. Bell et al. The skin impressions in question were from Y. rex, an adult individual, and so had no bearing on possible ontological presence and loss of feathers. The paper also points out that other tyrannosauroids are known to have had feathers. Both the Smithsonian article and the actual peer-reviewed paper are in the description.
And they have skin imprints from it. It was not a feathery type of creature.
Probably not, at least as an adult, although even that isn't for certain. Anyway, I think that's enough for today's video. Next time we'll hear more about how non-avian dinosaurs are probably still alive, or were until very recently. Except that, none of it will actually be, well, evidence. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovind, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Elron Teller, Phil Havara, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Mrs. Speckcinder, Sphincter of Doom, and the Venerable Bede. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out to the general public. Thanks for watching.